Hello and welcome back to Facebook Live, a very special Facebook Live. Rex isn't here, and we are joined by the one and only Max Aram, CEO and co-founder of PickMySolar.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back.
Last minute invite. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, well, you know how it goes. Startup world. But yes, thank you. Welcome back to PickMySolar Live. We're kicking off this new segment, What's New in Renewable Energy? So we're going to dive into the news a little bit, get a little bit of a sense of what's going on in the world of renewable energy before we engage with our deep dive of the week.
First off, I'm so glad that we brought this back. This was my favorite part of the Facebook Lives, that we just go very quickly, get some overviews, share some news. So
Nice.
Thanks, Annie, for getting back on this. Thank you.
Wonderful. So the first thing we want to talk about is the solar premiums. We've talked about it before. Solar does add value to your home. The Berkeley Labs did a study on that. Zillow recently confirmed that. And Zillow did a little bit more of a deep dive themselves on where solar premiums are the highest. New Jersey has nearly a 10% premium on homes with solar than without. And you can see that delta is quite large given the other ones. Other states on here are all in that 4 to 5% range. I would suspect that most of that is due to New Jersey's SRECs, which would pay you out on the production of that system. So it's not just that you're saving in New Jersey, you're getting production based on those SRECs. So if you have a house in New Jersey, you might be moving and you don't want to think about investing in solar, most solar systems are going to be net less than $32,000. So if that's what that premium is doing to your home, pretty substantial, even if you're doing that in just the short term. Whereas in these other states, definitely a great value.
That's amazing.
It's really great. Yeah, you can see the market is a little bit higher there in the state of Washington than it is in some of those other states. But solar works and it helps your resale value. So really awesome report there.
Oh, I think I just came up with an idea.
What idea?
We should just flip some homes in New Jersey, buy them, put solar panels, and sell them at premium.
Yeah, that's why he's a CEO, folks. Next bit of news, which we're going to go into, is our last bit of news today. Maryland's opened the first 100% electric vehicle charging station in Tacoma Park. That is pretty substantial news in that it was a former gas station. So this isn't, an electric vehicle charging station as you might recognize in, say, a parking lot where, I'd imagine that would be considered the same thing, but they always have those regular parking spots, the electric parking spots are more near the front, encouraging people to do it. This is a full transition. It's interesting just because of the time that it takes to fill up your car with gas and the time it takes to fill up with electric. What do you think, Max?
I'm a little bit skeptical.
Interesting.
I want to wait to see how this works out. From my perspective, I think it makes sense to have a charger at home and at work, because those are the two places that you spend long hours at.
Right.
So you can have your car fully charged or half charged at home. You have probably, most Americans drive less than 50 miles a day. So it means that you have enough charge with any of the electric cars
Right.
to make it to work. And they can plug your car for 4, 6, 8 hours, PickMySolar 10, 12 hours, to the charging, half fully charged, and then go home and do that. So charging station, I'm not sure. I think it works out if there's supercharging station that you can actually get 40-50% of the capacity of your battery in less than half an hour.
Right.
Maybe.
It's good for longer trips.
Yeah.
Not a daily stuff as much.
Yeah. So let's see how it works out.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies are investing in getting
Yeah.
these stations up and running. I've been traditionally very skeptical. I think the investment should be done by incentivizing workplaces and homeowners to adopt charging stations. So let's see how it works.
Yeah, and that goes into workplaces. You can have a commercial rate schedule, which is based on demand charges, and that's not really going to fluctuate too much. The charging of the electrical at your place of business isn't going to change your base rate too much. And people charging at home, charging at night, do a time of use rate plan, you're going to pay less to charge it at night than you would during the day. And some utilities even have a special EV rate plan, which encourages you even further. Like we're talking maybe 20% of that normal off-peak rate, but you just have that EV rate plan. And so you can really get a value from doing that at home.
It's amazing how much utility companies are actually investing in building the infrastructure for the future. I think that's we're gonna touch on the utilities and the change of their business model. We're in this midst of this transition to the electric future, electrified grid future. So electric car is gonna play a major role. So it's gonna be interesting to see that. Definitely, the utilities want to make sure that the load required to charge all the cars, all this fleet, is managed properly in different times of the day. So yeah, it's one of the most exciting new innovations that's coming in the pipeline.
Right. And that's a brilliant transition into our deep dive. So before we get into it, as always, ask us anything, write us a comment. We love to engage with you. Ask us stuff about the news. Share some things you want us to talk about in the news. Share some deep dives. We want to do things that are relevant to you. So this week, this is relevant to a lot of people. It's PG&E's power outage, and it's leaving quite a few people in the dark. And so we're going to talk about why this is happening, the effects of what it's happening, and then of course, as we always do, how solar and specifically batteries can help people out. So if you're not in PG&E, you may not have heard of this. If you are in PG&E, you very likely have. And so PG&E announced a public safety, public shutoff event to reduce the risk of wildfires. This is very important in California. We are becoming more and more susceptible to wildfires. It has been more prevalent, and there's obviously been a ton of damage that has been done as a result of that. Lives, property, all things lost that we need to try to protect as much as we can. And so do have to commend PG&E for trying to be proactive in these efforts. Still wildfires are happening, of course, but this is part of what Max, you just alluded to, which is those incentives to make a more stable grid.
Yep.
So we can get into what it is. What it is just quite simply when the stress of the grid is at the highest, they're in certain environmental conditions may change how the risk factor of these wildfires. PG&E, other utilities will say, you know what, we're going to shut down some power for a period of time just to try to mitigate those risks as best we can. And that's just the really high level what that public safety power shutoff is. How many people does this affect? As of Thursday, it was over 800,000. I've seen reports over 1 million. Initially, it was just, I think, 150,000, and that escalated very, very quickly. And of course, there have been fires to come. So this is something that people are taking very, very seriously. But obviously, in order to take it very seriously, it's going to affect a lot of people.
Yeah, it's been all over the news, especially in California. It's crazy to see this happening. Yeah. So it's. I mean, I'm originally from Iran, so it's not that uncommon in developing countries. But for United States, for California, the richest state in the country, and the 7th largest economy in the world. So this is a little bit odd to see this happening, but obviously, it's really hard to maintain this massive grid and deal with all this environmental impacts.
Yeah.
And it's a complicated process, and this challenged the utility, PG&E. I mean, there are a lot of smart people who know what they're doing, but still it's hard for them to manage that. Last year, what happened was crazy, and they tried to keep the lights on. What happened that the fires were started, end up being a massive lawsuit on PG&E, and they're investor-owned utility. So they want to make sure that they're protecting the bottom line. So this time they're trying to be proactive. I think the main source of the frustration, based on what I've read, is around miscommunication between the utility and the customers on the hours that they're gonna these blackouts will happen. It's not properly communicated. The maps are not 100% accurate. Actually, their CEO just mentioned yesterday that they're trying to improve their communication. Their website went down yesterday. Obviously, a lot of people, they're not prepared for 800,000 people coming to their site all of a sudden. So I think that these are things that utilities are trying to get, as you mentioned, get ahead of it. It's a huge challenge. A lot of pressure from the public. The governor just went after them yesterday. So it's really interesting to watch that. But what is the solution, Patrick? for all this?
Well, it's diversifying the grid on a very
There we go.
large spectrum. We do have a question from someone out there asking how old are these grid systems in California? I don't know the exact answer to that. That's something we can look up and leave in the comments. But my guess would be quite old. And you want to think about how we've had one way of producing and distributing energy. Maybe not producing, but distributing energy in this country and in California specifically. And the costs that go into maintaining those pieces are going to be a lot lower than creating entirely new ones. When things fail, surely they're going to have new things put into place. But surely if you've been in PG&E, to give you a little bit of scale, it covers basically kind of the middle California and all the way up. There's smaller municipal utilities all the way along the way, but if, from the coast all the way to Nevada is PG&E.
It's massive.
It's massive. And, there's a lot of area that's, pretty much unoccupied that those lines are going to have to go through to transmit that energy all the way back and forth, and those things aren't going to be rebuilt very often.
Yeah, some of these poles are 100 years old.
Right.
So, and I think one of the ones that caused the fire last year was a 100-year-old pole. And, that's why when people ask why you're so confident that the rate of electricity will continue going up, is exactly this.
Yeah.
So maintaining the grid and maintaining the lines is an expensive capex.
Right.
That's utilities have to cover. They have to maintain the roles. And then I think what's happening with the utilities is that they're trying to separate the generation piece from the distribution.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's brilliant. And I think in the future, with the electric cars coming to the grid, the role of the utilities will evolve into just making sure that they deliver electricity and maintain the lines, and
Basically
with transmission.
Yeah.
That's going to be because they were doing generation and then delivering the electricity. Now they're more trying to kind of reinvent themselves. So I think we're in this middle of this transition. I think with the cost of solar electricity and energy storage coming down, and CPUC and all the incentives from the state that's coming towards energy storage, I think we're going to basically help the grid with the generation side, and then they can get more involved on distribution and maintaining the lines, hopefully down the road.
Right, and then talking about maintaining those lines, that's why every single utility, when you go solar, they have a minimum fee, because if you're going to be exchanging to and from the grid, you're going to put stress on the grid whether or not you're also helping the grid. Just the fact that you're putting things onto the grid and you're taking from the grid requires, basically these utilities need to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have their charges for delivery, transmission, but also they're going to have fixed charges just for the use of that grid. And of course we always advocate that people stay grid tied, because you're not always going to be able to produce enough solar to feed the needs of your home, and that's why net metering is what it is. But that's a topic for another day. Back on to PG&E, when they do these weather events and these shut-off events, they begin to restore the power within a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also something that's not easy to do. We talked about how expansive PG&E is, how many people are being affected by this. They're going out to do maintenance, restore these parts of the grid, make sure that they're safe to turn back on. It is going to take time. It is going to affect a lot of people. And so that's just something to be aware of when the power does go out for you, that it's not something that's going to go out and come right back on. They're going to take a couple of days to begin that process. And then they have to go through all of that, and then the scope and the scale of the shutoff will dictate how long that restoration can take place.
So do you think that usually when there's like a blackout, normal blackout, it takes a few minutes or a few hours?
Right.
But these blackouts are longer. Do you think it's because of the safety issues and the weather conditions?
Yeah, it's because of the strategy. When the power goes out in the East Coast, it's more likely, lightning struck a tree down and that collapsed onto a power line. You have a very specific point of failure, and you have the team's going to be deployed to go do that right then and there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're shutting down power intentionally for over 1 million people, just think about how big 1 million people is. And you're likely not doing this in the cities. More often than not, these affect people that are out in the suburbs and even further past the suburbs. It's not those cities that get affected by the blackouts very often. You'll remember probably, between 5 to 10 years ago at this point, New York City experienced a blackout. And that was catastrophic event because of the stress on their grid. So it's usually the people that are further out, so it's more distributed, which does mean more power lines. If it happens in the city, you can act on it quicker just because the population is going to be more concentrated.
Yep.
So That's that's kind of the real macro level of it, and yeah, like you said, there's got to be some pretty smart people in these utilities that are making these decisions, because it's a very complicated thing and how everything is tied together.
Yeah.
And then the consequences, of course, the financial consequences are one thing. There's also very real life or death consequences, and then so when you think of those two things, not having power for a couple days is relatively menial if the alternative is potential of houses burning down and families being impacted in ways that are pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So
And from the utilities perspective, I think they're in a very tough situation because there was just a ruling on Friday against PG&E that
To
opens
increase
up, like a path for some of their investors, bondholders to take control of their bankruptcy rulings. So I think it's going to be interesting, and hopefully something good comes out of it, and and they it's going to be a learning curve for them to make sure that they put much more resources than previous on the maintaining the grid, and understanding that their role in the future is going to be more on that side rather than the generation side.
Right, we absolutely need the grid, but we need it to be stable and we need it to be safe.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that we can hope the utilities can deliver upon. What we can try to deliver upon as an average homeowner is adopting alternative sources of power. And that's not just talking about solar, we're talking about batteries, because this is twofold. When power does go out for you in these events, with a battery, you can operate in a closed loop system. And so you can produce solar power, you can fill up your battery, and let's remember, most of the time they shut power down, it's during high heat, a lot of sun. So you're gonna have, these will likely coincide with good solar producing days. And so you'll be able to use all that solar in your own home in a self-containing loop, and at night you can store that stuff in the battery and you can use that. I would still advocate for you being conservative with your energy use, especially if you were only to have one battery. I wouldn't be blasting the AC,
Just
running loads of laundry. Yeah, so use what you need to use and be relatively conservative with your high usage things, which would be air conditioning, washer, dryer, dishwasher, probably even any sort of pool pump or something. I would completely shut that off during a power outage, and then really focus on just keeping the lights on. Use that air conditioning in spurts if and when you need it, and being kind of as conservative as you can. But it does give you that flexibility to use it. The other thing that it does by going solar and using your own energy, it helps create kind of an effective microgrid. And it's contained in just your home, but what it can do is move just kind of a smaller population of people into a kind of a self-contained loop. I think we're looking further, maybe 10 years down the line, we're going to use that grid, but maybe that grid is more contained to a neighborhood, and that neighborhood can share their own solar and their own batteries and shift it, and you don't even have to use the larger, let's say PG&E as much. There'll still probably be PG&E lines, but if it's self-contained to a little bit of an area, you might not have as much transmission to worry about, which would then reduce the stress and potential security.
Yeah, because there are two challenges. During the peak hours, generation is a challenge for utilities. That they need to produce enough electricity, then deliver it to the consumers. There are two peaks usually, like the businesses, and then homeowners towards like 6-7 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have more solar plus battery bundles installed in the grid, so that just kind of shaves off this peak demands. So more utilities, more and more, can focus on the delivery system.
That's a great point, because when you go solar, you're going to go onto a time of use rate plan, and the energy costs more during the day. So if somebody goes battery with us, we recommend, hey, store that energy or some of it during the day when the costs are a little bit lower, and then deploy it in that peak time, which in PG&E I believe is around 5 to 8, most times maybe 4 to 9, somewhere in that window, and that's when that stress is at its highest. And so if you can use that, then you're doing exactly that. You're helping the grid, and the rate schedule is incentivizing you to help the grid. It is saying we want to almost punish you for using this at the peak time. And that's
Makes sense.
right. And so if you have the battery, you will save more, and you'll help out the grid. And so it's kind of a win-win for all in that scenario.
So I think if you just layer some behavioral changes on top of getting solar and battery, let's say if you want to do a load of laundry, you do it at 10 p.m. So I think that plus solar and battery, I think gives you a nice transition to the point that you can save money and you can actually help the grid and everything. So I just want to ask you a question. Let's look into one case of an average 7 kilowatt system with an LG Chem battery. So how the system works. So roughly the cost of this and how many hours of electricity homeowners will have during the peak hours. So if the battery is fully charged during the day, so how many hours they can use that for on critical load. So is it sustainable to just basically go 2 days without electricity?
It depends on the customer. It depends on the home. That should be an asterisk on every answer for a solar question. But by and large, yes. The LG Chem has a usable kilowatt hour of, I believe, 9.3 kilowatt hours.
That's a lot.
It's a decent amount. And so if you're able to fill that entirely in the day,
which is possible.
It's entirely possible. Your solar system on a 7 kilowatt will absolutely be producing that. And so what I would recommend is you use what you need to use. Everything else gets funneled into that battery, and then at night you have all that excess. You know, if you're working during the day, you just go ahead and fill that battery up, and then your solar system will shut off if you fill that up and the grid is down, because it has nowhere else to go. Normally it would go back into the grid, but we've gone through it before. Can't put energy onto the grid when people are working.
It's dangerous.
Right. So, yeah, you would see. I'm forgetting the second part of your question. Was around cost there?
Critical load.
Oh, so for the critical loads.
How much of power? How many hours of power do you have? If it's only for, like, let's say, one fridge to keep the food.
Well, usually you're doing a breaker, right? And you can choose whatever breakers you want. Most people that we see will do their master bedroom, their kitchen, so maybe a couple other bedrooms, and maybe the living room. Occasionally people want to do an air conditioning unit. It's your prerogative, but it's going to drain that battery very, very quickly.
You can use a fan instead.
Yeah, you could absolutely use a fan, but you would also need to plug that fan into the room at which is on the critical load.
That's true.
You can't.
That's all you need.
Right.
You can't, for 24 hours or 48 hours, you can just stay in the room.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, it's still a blackout.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. You shouldn't be hosting a party.
It's an emergency situation.
Right. Yeah, it's an emergency situation that you're making the best of.
Yeah.
You're not. You know, you're not going to be able to go nuts. But on this, we also have another question in. So great engagement today, guys. So this is a two-part question. We'll take it one at a time. With the recent PG&E incident, due to the sheer size of the grid and cost, will the residents see a spike in kilowatt hours after repairs are done? That's a great question. Historically, yes. You're going to see those costs go up every single year regardless. What Max alluded to earlier, basically PG&E kind of got denied for a massive increase, which is kind of above the standard. Every rate increase has to be approved in these investor-owned utilities by the CPUC. CPUC reviews kind of the why as to why PG&E needs to increase their rates, or SDG&E or SCE, whoever it is, and they will say yes or no, or whatever that level is, they will dictate it. PG&E will more than likely submit a request for an increase. They had a very significant request recently get denied. My guess is they're going to come with a smaller one, and I would say yes, you're going to see those rates go up. The timing of that, TBD, but usually we see PG&E, I believe, is a yearly update, and then they submit for some regular or more irregular updates throughout the course of the year as needed. I wouldn't be shocked to see this just looped into their yearly update. But they may have already had to submit that, so you might see this in sometime Q1, Q2 next year. The second part of that question is, in comparing the economics of solar and battery, which wins? Well, solar alone right now already wins in PG&E. Solar plus battery already wins in PG&E. We're talking lifetime savings in excess of $50,000, $60,000 on anything above like a 5 kilowatt system.
That's a Tesla.
It is. It's exactly a Tesla. A loan figure in solar versus utility, solar wins in PG&E. Solar plus battery on a loan, it's a lot closer. because you're adding a significant cost where a decent amount of that is going to be recouped over a long period of time, and the value of kind of having your own stability should these blackouts happen is not really quantifiable.
Yeah, it probably can.
Right.
It depends on the person.
If having a battery, if having power on during an outage is worth $2,000 to you, then you're going to see the value very quickly, and the ROI is incredible. If it is a nice bonus to have, but it's not really something you want to consider the cost of,
Maybe some people just want to have a candle night and have
Yeah.
some romantic time.
Right,
So,
yeah.
and
Turn
it's
the
not worth
phone-
anything
yeah,
for them.
Turn the phones off. So it is dependent on you. One more question. Wow, we are having an interesting topic today.
It is.
It's
very
very
important.
it's very timely.
Yeah, the fire just came to Selmar of north of Los Angeles, so
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
it's crazy times.
So can you monitor how much energy the battery has stored during an outage? Absolutely yes. If you are considering a Tesla Powerwall, it has a very, very cool monitoring system. When the grid is on, you can say, from your phone, you can tell it, stop sending power to the grid, put it in my battery. Or you can program it so at 50%, I want to start using it in the house, or whatever it might be. You can really do this. And during an outage, that doesn't change. What might change is your ability to charge your cell phone, so you can monitor that, or what have you. And I'm less familiar with some of the other monitoring systems, but every battery has a monitoring system. You can absolutely see what that is. I think Tesla's really cool, but that's what Tesla does.
So for all the other batteries, so I think we covered a few weeks ago, we covered Lumen smart panels.
Yes, that we did.
So do you think that having a smart panel and connecting your battery and solar to that and just like switching all this stuff is
Right. Let's remember, batteries were not really readily available to the average homeowner until about 3 years ago. So this is still a very new technology, and the next step is to make it more of a closed loop system within your own home. And a smart panel will allow you to do that. All of those things are going to come with their own set of monitoring, and because think about it just from this perspective, you want to be competitive in a space, and what do people need? They need to be able to look at it. Some people just want to geek out over the cool tech, and they want to do that every day. Some people want to know, hey, I want to make sure that my solar is producing and filling up my battery and exactly how many kilowatt hours I use, so I know what to do when the grid goes down. Those are the features that these companies are going to need to make and compete on this level, because that's where everything is going. And California's kind of at the forefront just due to the consequences, the environmental consequences, and other ones we've talked about due to these fires. So if you're in another state, it's something where maybe like a strong storm on the East Coast would knock out power. It's very common,
these days, yeah.
right? There are more of them, shorter outages, and so that might be an instance where you have a Tesla and you say, I want to keep minimum 50% of my battery full. I will never deploy more than that, just so I always have that. Because let's say the power goes out at night and you have an empty battery, your solar's not going to charge that thing to the morning. So you would still be out of power until that solar started producing. And so you would have to wait that day. So there's a ton of different strategies you can take with this. We see customers do all sorts of things. Traditionally, we would say it's used to be more of a luxury item, but now we're seeing every month, every quarter, we're seeing more and more people attach battery to their solar system.
Do you think that all these weather events happens in California or the hurricanes that creates instability?
Yeah, in the south, that's a good point.
Are these like the cost of climate change that we're paying?
I'm not a scientist, but it's hard to argue in many respects. Yeah, I think these are it's twofold, because climate change is real, despite what some people will have you believe, and it's going to lead to more natural disasters. Natural disasters will knock out power. So it's and we just talked about what you should do if you want to have that security. So it's very, very cyclical.
Yeah,
and then
we somehow directly or indirectly are paying for it.
Right.
So,
and we don't, it's a what is an ocean if not, a billion drops or whatever of water, whatever that saying is. So even if you're thinking, okay, if I go, I'm not gonna stop a hurricane by getting a battery system, sure, but if enough people do that, if that becomes a larger enough initiative and that enters a larger, discussion point politically, globally, then each step along the way is helpful. We wouldn't be having these conversations if it weren't for the all the people that have already gone solar in California. We wouldn't even have time of use. We wouldn't have on and off peak. So this has been an evolving thing, and climate change is
So I
just
think
kind of another factor to it. Yeah, of course.
I've been here in the States for 9 years now, and last year we had fire. So in California, the fires used to be like every 10 years. Now we had fire last year, and we just had fire in Sylmar yet today. So it's just happening something that it's just the frequency is like every year, and
Right.
then hurricane. I don't know, the first 3 years of me being here in the States, we had like maybe one. And then it seems that it's just becoming every
Yeah.
year a new one is hitting. So I think that the frequency of these weather events is gonna be like more and more.
It's the frequency and the scale.
The scale, yeah.
Yeah, because
And-
we've had hurricanes, but then you have like every few years you have that big Category 5 or whatever it is, and then it does seem like at least there's many more threats.
Yeah.
However many of them hit land, that is what that seems to be, or hit land in the States. It's obviously doing really significant damage in the Caribbean,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is but that's more speaking of
So I
stateside.
think what's going to happen is that the federal government is going to have all these like relief packages for these damaged areas. So and the way that we all pay for it from our taxes.
Mhm.
So that's going to be like increasing the cost of living for everyone. And then events like this, blackouts, a lot of people will have to adapt solar and battery.
Right.
So I think, I don't know, just feel that the resiliency is gonna be a very hot topic in the next few
Yeah.
years, and everyone is gonna try. The reason that the value of homes in New Jersey and in some areas, I was just looking at the list and I was just kind of like mapping them. I was like, these are the areas that actually people care about the resiliency.
Right.
So I think,
Interesting.
I think this is gonna be a very hot topic for the next 3 years. That homes will be built with this resiliency in mind because of the weather events.
Yeah, and you see it now on a more reactionary basis.
Yeah.
Where things go wrong, and then we say, okay, that hospital in Costa Rica is now going to be provided by solar, batteries, everything. But that hospital is still nearly destroyed and out of power, and all God knows what happened to the people that were in there who were in critical condition. So what we're talking about now is you see more people do the proactive measure, where I might lose power next year, so I want to get a battery to do that. And so you're seeing people take that proactive approach, and again, hopefully that is something that, if it's done on a very small scale, bleeds into the larger discussions and policies.
So we at PickMySolar, we are committed to educating consumers.
Sure.
We've talked about resiliency, batteries, solar for a long time, 6 years now. But I think an event like this, that you deal, like almost 2 million people dealt with this in the last few days.
Very front of mind.
So
yeah.
I think that is just gonna click in their mind, that
Right.
they're just gonna realize every aspect that we mentioned about the resiliency, energy independence, and all those factors. I think it's gonna have a huge impact. I think the silver line is that yes, this is bad, but utilities are gonna be more progressive, and they're gonna have more incentives for homeowners.
Sure.
CPUC probably, we asked CPUC to increase the SCHIP incentives for homeowners, more homeowners. I think these are the positive impacts of events like this, that hopefully will increase the adoption of clean energy, clean technology, and is gonna reverse the course, hopefully.
Yeah, people will always respond more and adapt change more when they are personally affected by something.
Yeah, crisis.
Yeah, so it is absolutely
Brings
unfortunate.
people together.
Right. Yeah. So there is a silver lining
Yeah.
to all this, and that is what we're trying to prove. And as always, we are PickMySolar. If this is something you are considering, we do provide you with competing solar solution from top providers in your area. All of our providers do solar and battery. And from now until the end of the year, you refer friends, family, get our discount, our friends and family discount of $599
Wow.
each. That is something that
Is that the highest in the country?
It must be.
Yeah.
It must be. So, yeah, something you're quite proud of.
I
I can
know.
tell. So yeah, we do want to try and help you guys out as much as possible when it comes to doing that. And as always, thanks for watching. This was a long one, but I think an important one. So long, and we will see you next week.